Okay, folks, at this point we are in chapter 8 of or part 8 of our project from the text. In this case, we're going to actually use some authentication to erase one of the weaknesses of our application, the fact that um, anyone can go in there and manipulate the data. Of course, the posts will be saved locally. Our conversion to Firebase here is about allowing posts to be visible by all. But as far as authentication, we want people to be authenticated before they can post. So what we're going to be doing is creating a new project in Firebase. So you can get to Firebase by going to firebase.google.com. And when you do that, you'll get this. So this is firebase.google.com. Now, if you have a Gmail property, you have a Gmail account, you'll log in and you'll see this. This is my little handle here. If you don't have a Gmail account, if you go to Gmail or mail.google.com, you can be asked to create an account, and that's how you can get involved. But as a developer, you really have to have some sort of Gmail entity, especially if you're in web, because there's so many things that Google does for us, including analytics and things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my console, and we're going to create our project, and we're going to add authentication. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add the project. I'll call it Applied JavaScript 1, and you'll see that it slugs it for me. See the dashes here, and gives a little post number here. So I'm going to click Continue. Now it asks me if I want to add Google Analytics for my Firebase project. I do not. This is for the class only, so I'm going to erase anything that might be confusing, and I'm going to create the project. So if you see me pause and come back, that's because something's taking a long time. But the first thing I'm going to do when this thing gets created is go into my dashboard and do a quick overview of what Firebase can do for us. Now, the data that we're saving in Firebase is always going to be JavaScript object notation. So it's really perfect for our needs. So right now we have this. We see a project overview. What's cool is we can connect to React by using the registration here, which we'll do in a second. But I want to make sure I'm in the app itself here. And what I want to do is add authentication. So I clicked on authentication here, and I'm going to go ahead and set up my sign up method. Now, here you see email password is disabled. I'm simply going to enable it. They provide all the functionality, address verification, password recovery, etc. The email link is a passwordless sign-in. I'm not going to enable that because that would require additional code. I want to keep it really simple, and I'm going to click Save. So now my email password combination is enabled, but I haven't added any users. So I'm going to go ahead and click Users here. And I'm going to add my own email. So I'll need this email to test with. And this has to be 6 characters, so I'll just do test me, and I'll add the user. Super. Now the next step is to add authentication. So what we're going to do is click on the project overview again, and I want to make sure that I have my app nickname. I'll call this Applied CRUD. I don't need hosting for this app because I'm going to do it locally. I'm going to click register the app. I'm sorry, I put CRYD. That's fine. I'll leave it as is. So now I have my section here. Now, if we go to our code, this is from Step 8 Authentication, and we look at Firebase JS. This is our import stuff, and this is what we need to add for this thing to work, okay? So I'm going to go back to my app here, and I'm going to copy and paste my Firebase config. I'm copying, and I'm pasting it underneath. Because you notice this is API key, app domain, database URL, project ID, storage bucket, message sender ID. There's also an app ID here. Interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this, we're going to paste it over in the config, and then we're going to just simply save it. So I have my app ID there. Now, let's go, and I'm going to go back to my section here. We want to make sure that that's completely initialized. And you see the initialize app config, which is right here. So that's Firebase config with that variable. So this core is going to be added automatically because we've imported it above, okay? And then in our app.js, we should be importing everything we need. See import Firebase from Firebase. Cool. Now let's go ahead and run it. So I'm going to go ahead and npm start. I did my install already. And we're going to start up our server real quick. And if you remember, my authentication was kdsecor@gmail and then test me. So all we're going to do is run through this authentication real quick and then bounce back and make sure that we understand the code here. So right here, failed to compile, cannot resolve Firebase app in authentication source. So I'm going to pause this video real quick and go back to it. So one of the things that I've forgotten was to actually use Node to install the Firebase dependencies. So I'm going to stop my server real quick, and that was silly of me, but that happens in a world where we're very dependent on other functionalities. I think you'll really like Firebase, though. If you've had experience with like MySQL, this is a little different animal, and it really takes care of us with things that we used to have to hand code. So I'm going to install this real quick. Hopefully it doesn't last too long. And I'm going to leave this real quick. So this explains the connection. And what we're going to do is, because I'm working with the finished script, we're going to go in and test it once this gets done. And hopefully it works now. So I'm going to restart the server. It should just take just a second. And once it does, we'll do the login. So for your final projects, if you want authentication, this is the way to do it. And I recommend you do keep it. Because it's an example of, you know, decent authentication with an external SAS, which is software as a service, which is what Firebase is. So I actually have done a lot with Parse, which was an old software as a service from Facebook. It was really almost the same thing. So what I'm saying is that if you learn Firebase when other software services come along, it's going to be a pretty easy conversion back and forth. You'll just understand how Firebase works with the authentication, and you'll be okay. So while we're waiting for this to install, I am going to go back to the console real quick, and I'm going to hit refresh real quick, because I do have my new project. And this is it right here, and you see the code at the bottom. So if you notice here on the left, you have authentication, and there's our one record. We also have a database, which we haven't created yet. That's what we'll be using to add CRUD to. We have storage. We have hosting, which we elected not to use. So storage is for user-generated files, basically uploads from our users. And then we've got our database again. So that's kind of what we're going for. Now, I'm going to pause this video because we're still installing the Firebase, and I'll open it up when it gets installed. Okay, folks, so one thing you need to do to make sure this thing is functional is when you have your code, make sure you copy this script source and add it to your index.html inside the public folder. That's why it wouldn't compile. So now that we have it compiling, we can move forward. But you know, if I want to go ahead and log in, I can just type in something like this, hit login, and you see the HTML5 stuff here. But I want to do it incorrectly first. And you see it came back non-authentic. So if I were to go in and do kdsecor@gmail, hopefully because of the string, and use test me, which is what I did before, now you see it's pending and we're good. So that said, we've got our authentication totally functioning. Okay. Now if I go to my site here and click on this, you can see I can still get in and see the thing. But now once I log in, you need to be logged into Post. So I'm going to do kdsecor@gmail again and test me, and we'll see the difference in the functionality. So now I have a new post link, and I can post whatever the heck I want. So the idea is I can see other posts. Now keep in mind that's still from state. We haven't done the database CRUD yet, which we'll be doing in the next chapter. But let's take a look at the code now. So as far as our login, let's take a good look at this first. Well, we can start with app.js actually, because that's our router. I mean, that's where we're adding things. So we have we've already done this right here. So it's basically saying if we have a token in our state that is authenticated. So once we log in, we're going to set a property and state to be authenticated, and then on log out, we're going to call the onLogout function that will remove this stuff. So everything here, here's the login and the logout. So this is all provided by Firebase. And on login, we take our arguments, email and password, and we call the auth method in Firebase. And sign in with email and password That is what's in that script source. Then we can set authenticated to be true, otherwise we'll catch an error. And then log out, we're going to call the sign out method and set our is authenticated to false. That's basically how it works. Pretty easy. There's other things we need to do here, though, and that is we should have a login route right here. So there's our login route. So just in retrospect, all we did was add the Firebase.js and our config, and now we can use the Firebase. Now back on app.js, we need the router and we need the login and logout methods. So this right here, if this is authenticated, if it's not, you see the ternary here with the question mark. If it's not authenticated, then we'll call the login component. Otherwise, we'll just redirect to the home page. So let's hit our components and take a good look at the login now, because everything else in this section is the same. So here's our login, and in this case we have our form that has on submit call handle login. And what we're going to do is call the props on login, which is back in app.js, and we'll pass the email and password. Again, that's back to app.js where we have the login method, which takes those two arguments right here. So that's in our props. Let me go back to this, our login.js, excuse me. Notice the event prevent default. That means that when the button gets pressed, nothing gets submitted. It's just basically not refreshing anything. So if you see right here, we have a state that has email and password as blank. Once we have those values, that will set is authenticated to the state. So we're going to set, if you look here on change, we're going to set the state for email to be eTarget value, which is what's in the text field. So on change would be anytime you hit a keystroke. We've been through this before in this project, and this would set the password to be the eTarget value, that specific value. And this submit is basically disabled equals if no state email and no state password, then the button is not there. So basically this is validating those form fields. That's why, and I'll go ahead and log out, when we go ahead and log in here, you see how it's disabled? There's nothing there. But once I add something here, it becomes enabled. So that's why that works the way it does. So that's the form, and the handle login is doing nothing more but routing the login to the section. So very, very simple. Not much code got added here, but what we've done in this video is we've gone into Firebase, we added a project, we added authentication, then we added a user, and then we came back, we added Firebase.js with our configuration, we added a new routing for the app.js for the login page, and then we added login methods and logout methods to the app.js, and then we have our component, which is the login form. And now we have authentication in our project.